Peter, tonight you were amazing.
Tola, you're the one who made me feel alive again. That old wife will never know.
Oh, God. Peter, what are you doing?
My dear friend in life, betrayal does not care about age, but respect is something you must stand up and protect for yourself. No one is ever too old to walk away from pain, and no one is ever too late to begin again. Before we begin this story, tell me where you're watching from. Comment your city and country. If you love real-life emotional stories, hit subscribe, tap like, and share this video with someone who needs to remember that dignity matters more than age. Now sit back and listen to the story of Mama Adaze, a 60-year-old woman who chose to rise instead of breaking. She and Mr. Peter had lived together for more than 40 years. On their wedding day, Lagos wasn't as crowded as it is now. The dirt road in front of the church was still full of stones. Her wedding dress was rented, a bit loose around the waist and held together with safety pins. People used to say Peter was the most handsome young man in the neighborhood, while Adaze was just a village girl who could cook good soup, smile gently, and never argued with anyone for more than 3 sentences. 40 years later, everything was different. They lived in a 2-story cream-colored house with a balcony facing a paved road, a black iron gate, and a tiny flower garden where she planted her bougainvillea. Every morning, neighbors walking by would say, "Chai, look at Mr. and Mrs. Peter, old already, but still walking together." Truly a model couple. Their 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl, were grown, working, with families of their own. During holidays and birthdays, the house filled with laughter. To outsiders, their family was a perfect picture. A successful husband, a gentle wife, good children, a beautiful home, and plenty of land. But no one knew that in their early years in Lagos, Adaze had to stay up late sewing Peter's torn shirt so he could wear it to work the next morning. No one remembered how she had to water down the porridge so all 3 children could eat, while Peter ran around trying to build a livelihood. For years, Peter was the pride of the whole street. He opened a building materials shop, then a storage yard. Friends came over for beer, slapped his back and said, "Peter, you're really a man who knows how to rise. Don't forget us when you become a big man." And Adaze, whenever she heard that, only smiled while serving muwomwa, wiping tables, pouring drinks. She didn't need anyone to know how much she supported him behind the scenes. Seeing her husband walk tall was enough. But in 1995, Lagos rained more than usual. Rain on the roof, rain on the roads, rain on contracts that once seemed certain. A major construction project was canceled. A few partners disappeared with the deposit. Material prices skyrocketed. Peter, the man who once stood so tall, suddenly began walking slower. The phone rang all night. Banks called. Creditors knocked. Adaze was the one who opened the door, bowed politely, and begged for more time. One night, while the rain slammed against the window like someone trying to break into the house, she saw Peter sitting alone in the living room. The lights were off. Only lightning illuminated his face, no longer the confident face of the man of the house, but the face of a lost child. "Peter," she whispered. He didn't answer. His hand clutched a stack of debt papers, trembling so much the pages trembled with him. "I've ruined this family, Adaze." He choked. "If they take the house, the land, I don't know how I'll face the children." She stood behind him, looking at his slumped shoulders on the sofa they spent 3 years paying off. Her heart tightened, not because of money, but because she saw him breaking inside. The next morning, she woke earlier than usual. While Peter lay awake, exhausted from the night's worry, Adaze opened the old wooden trunk under the wardrobe. Inside were things no one knew she kept. A few pieces of gold her mother left her wedding earrings, a worn bracelet, and the small savings she had quietly collected from selling snacks and doing sewing work for neighbors. She stroked the cloth wrapped around the gold, like touching a piece of her youth. Then she packed everything, tied it tightly, held it to her chest like a child, and quietly left the house at dawn. She reached the bank before the doors fully opened. The guard recognized her, the woman who used to come here with her husband when business was good. "Madam Peter, your husband isn't with you today," she smiled gently. "Today, I'll go in his place." Inside the banking hall, her hand didn't shake once as she signed. She sold the small amount of gold, added her secret savings, and gathered everything she could. It wasn't enough to erase the entire debt, but it was enough to pull the family away from the edge. The manager looked at her over his thick glasses. "Are you sure about this, madam? This account is under your name. If you move everything to Mr. Peter's loan, you take on all the risk." Adaze smiled softly, her eyes lined with age yet still bright. "We're husband and wife, if he falls. How can I stand on the shore alone?" But then the manager sent her to the legal office for adjustments, and the lawyer asked, "Do you want to ensure the house and land can be seized if things go bad again?" That question opened another door in her mind. She remembered Peter's eyes the night before, the eyes of a proud man crushed by failure, a man who would be even more broken if he learned his wife saved him. Part of her wanted to tell him everything, but another part, shaped by many storms, by watching men make foolish choices out of wounded pride, whispered, "Protect the children and the home first. Then figure out the rest." The meeting with the lawyer wasn't filled with tears. It was quiet, calm, almost frighteningly steady. "You're misunderstanding. This isn't. It's not what it looks like." But the sentence shattered the moment it left his lips. Adaze didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She didn't lunge forward like the women in Nigerian movies. She just stood there, still, silent, like a statue cracking from the inside. She looked at Peter, the man who once swore he would never let her cry. She looked at Tola, the widow next door, who used to borrow their path to ask for salt, water, sometimes even a meal when money was tight, and in that moment, a part of her heart died. The home that once echoed with the laughter of their 3 children was now filled only with the whisper of wind through the curtains, and the sound of her own heartbeat falling into a pit. She stood frozen in place. Her heart dropped to her feet. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She didn't throw a tantrum. In the living room, still heavy with the scent of cheap perfume and the mixed sweat of a man and another woman, the 60-something-year-old woman simply stood there, looking at the 2 people in front of her as if they were strangers who had accidentally wandered into her home. Peter braced himself for the storm. He waited for the scream, "You traitor!" Waited for the slap, the curses, the chaos he had seen on TV and in the videos neighbors liked to show around. But nothing happened, only silence. A thick, suffocating silence you could almost reach out and touch. Finally, Adaze spoke. 4 words, so soft they sounded like a breath. "All right. Come inside." Peter frowned, confused. What do you mean?" Adaze didn't look at him. She turned toward the door, gripping the handle as if it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing. Her voice was steady, flat. "Button your shirt, and tell that woman to go home." Madame Tola snorted, adjusting her strap, lips curling. "I think you should." Adi's eyes flicked toward Tola for just half a second. No words, but in that split moment, the woman who was used to lifting her chin and smirking suddenly felt a cold shiver run down her spine. It was not the look of a weak wife who had just caught her husband cheating. It was the look of a woman who had survived many storms and knew exactly when the wind was about to change. Tola froze. She wanted to fire back with another snide remark, but somehow her throat tightened. She only rolled her eyes, grabbed her purse from the chair. "Fine, I'm leaving. But remember this. Men don't like this kind of silence." The door shut behind her with a dry click. Only 2 people remained in the living room, Adaze and Peter, the ticking clock. The faint sound of cars outside. Peter's panicked breathing, and Adaze's frighteningly calm one. Adaze, let me explain. Peter stammered, stepping forward. She raised a hand, palm outward, like a stop sign. No need. Peter froze. I was drunk. She tricked me. Adaze turned away from him, staring at the curtain still swaying from the breeze earlier. She slowly removed her shawl and placed it on the chair. The slow, quiet movement made Peter feel like he was losing his mind. I saw, she said, still calm. I saw enough. Peter swallowed hard. His throat felt like it was filled with sand. It was just one time. Just one mistake. Adaze turned, looking him straight in the eyes. There were no tears. No sobbing. Just exhaustion. The kind that stretches from the corner of the eyes to the corner of the mouth. Peter, a man does not accidentally fall into another woman's bed. You had to walk there. You had to open the door. You had to step inside. You had to lie down. Each sentence was a stone, paving the path right back to the place he had chosen to go. Peter didn't realize it, but in that moment, Adaze had already stepped out of the conversation. On the outside, she was still talking, still listening. But inside, a part of her heart had folded into a dark corner and quietly locked the door. Because sometimes, if you allow yourself to scream, you'll shatter. But if you remain silent, you'll survive long enough to decide what comes next. Adaze chose silence. She walked past Peter toward the window. From there, she could see the small yard where she watered her plants every morning and chatted with her old neighbors. Suddenly, everything looked strange, like a painting hanging on someone else's wall. Peter stood there, abandoned in his own living room, feeling like a thief. We can still move past this, he said desperately. I've been with you for over 40 years. You have to understand me. Adaze touched the window frame where the afternoon light spilled through. The hand of a woman who had washed thousands of shirts, cooked thousands of meals, signed the papers that saved him from debt. That hand now rested on the wood, steady as a pillar. Peter, she whispered, after 40 years. Trust me, I understand you too well. But she didn't finish the sentence. She stopped as if the rest was no longer worth saying aloud. She turned around, took a deep breath. Go shower. Change your clothes. Tonight, we will have dinner as usual. Peter's eyes widened. Usual? What are you talking about? You're not angry? Adaze looked at him so long that he had to look away. Angry? Anger is for people still naive enough to believe that a few apologies can fix anything. Adaze was no longer at that age. While Peter walked toward the bedroom, confused, terrified, and relieved all at once, he believed he had been forgiven, that his wife was gentle, calm, not dramatic, not loud, not calling their children or the neighbors. He entered the room, closed the door, and soon the sound of running water filled the house. Only Adaze and the silence remained. She stood still until her heartbeat slowed. Then she reached for her phone on the shelf by the window. It wasn't a fancy smartphone, but it was enough for what she needed. She unlocked it, opened the camera. With one hand, she held the curtain slightly open, just enough for the lens to see the living room where Peter had been standing with Tola. Her other hand was steady. This wasn't the first time in her life she had to do something quietly. Adaze inhaled slowly and pressed record, not to capture more cheating, the act was already done, but to record what remained. The perfume-soaked air, the wrinkled sofa, the glass with a faint lipstick stain, the scarf Tola left behind. The details Peter would deny later if he ever dared to say. Nothing happened. You imagined it. Adaze knew men forget. Men deny. Men rewrite history. But cameras don't. She lifted the phone higher, slow, methodical, like someone documenting a crime scene. Every corner, every trace. Every small detail that could become a dull blade later. Cutting through future lies. When she had enough, she stopped the recording and saved the video. Her finger lingered on the screen. For a moment, she saw her reflection, a woman with graying hair, tight lips, tired eyes, not from crying, but from years of giving too much of herself. A daze set the phone down and masked her emotions with a thin layer of calm. When Peter stepped out in a clean shirt, hair still wet, he thought everything was over, like the closed bathroom door behind him. He had no idea the real storm had only just begun. And he certainly didn't know, while he held his mistress in the living room, while Tola mocked her and said she needed to learn how to please her husband. A daze had already turned on the camera the very moment she walked in. Every word, every action, every trace of betrayal was recorded. That night, all three of her children, Uch, Keen, and Chisholm, came home. Lagos was glowing under the city lights, the noise of traffic flowing like a river that never slept. Inside the cream-painted two-story house, the air felt heavy, as if someone had placed a giant stone in the middle of the living room. Uch arrived first. The moment he stepped through the door, he sensed something was wrong. On any normal day, his mother would greet him with a gentle smile and ask, "Have you eaten, my son?" But today, she stood back, gripping the edge of her shawl. Her lips tried to form a smile, but couldn't. "You called me. What's going on, Mom?" Uch asked, placing a hand on her shoulder and feeling the coldness of her skin. Keen came right after, shirt still wrinkled from rushing, his laptop bag bouncing against his side. He didn't even bother removing his shoes as he usually did. His eyes scanned the room, counting faces before he asked, "Where's Dad?" Chisholm arrived last, the youngest daughter, once her father's little girl. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor. She still held her small handbag when she saw her mother sitting hunched on the sofa. "Mom, why did your voice sound so strange on the phone?" "I left my shift early to come. In the living room, the TV was off. The lights were on, but the warmth they usually carried was gone." Peter sat in a single chair, separated from everyone, avoiding his children's eyes like a schoolboy caught cheating. A daze took a long breath. She was not someone who enjoyed confrontation. For years, she had been the peacemaker, not the fire starter. But this time, she knew that if she didn't speak, no one else could speak for her. She picked up the remote and turned on the TV. The screen lit up, reflecting every tense face in the room. Uch frowned. "Mom!" A daze didn't answer. She simply opened the video library and clicked on a single file saved under a cold, emotionless title. "Today." The soft click of the play button sounded gentle, but in her mind, it landed like a judge's gavel. The living room appeared on the screen, the same room they were all sitting in. But it was a different afternoon, a different light, and a different Peter. Uch saw his father's shirt unbuttoned at the top, hair messy, a weak smile on his lips. Then he saw Madame Tola, the widowed neighbor, the woman who brought pastries over, who used to call Ades, that sweet neighbor, now leaning close to his father, giggling like a 20-year-old. Keen gripped the armrest so tightly his knuckles turned white. Chisholm raised a hand to her mouth instinctively, but her eyes stayed locked on the screen, the cheap laughter, the whispers, Peter's hand on Tola's waist. A quick kiss, bold, unashamed. Then Tola's voice filled the room. Maybe she should learn how to take care of her husband. Men need to feel loved, you know. And then their mother's voice, trembling but clear. "Oh God. Peter, what are you doing?" No one in the room actually breathed during those minutes. Only the video played slow, steady, stretching the humiliation out inch by inch. When it ended, the room dimmed slightly as the screen faded to black. The first sound was not shouting, not cursing. It was Uch, the eldest, speaking softly but with crushing weight. "Mom." He turned to Ades. For the first time in his life, he saw that the wrinkles around her eyes were not just age but years of quiet endurance. "Mom, we're sorry you had to go through this." Somewhere deep inside him, shame flared. He had always been proud of his strong father, had bragged that his dad was a true family man. Now that image collapsed inside him like a wall punched from within. Peter leaned forward. "Uch, listen. Keen stood up before he could finish. He didn't look at his father. He stared at the TV screen, where the faint reflection of two bodies still lingered. "No need to explain," Keen said, voice flat and hard. "We're adults. You can't sweet-talk us like kids." Peter turned to him. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong, but this is between your mother and me. You children shouldn't." Keen snapped around, eyes sharp a look he had never given his father before. "Between you and Mom? But it happened in our home, right in front of our ancestors' shrine. On the same sofa we sit on every Sunday after church." Each sentence dropped into the room like a blade. Adaze sat quietly, fingers intertwined. She didn't want her children turning into judges. No matter what, Peter was their father. But she also knew her silence had expired. The truth now belonged to all of them. Chisholm, who had been quiet, finally set her bag down. She sat beside her mother, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Her mother's frame felt smaller, fragile like bones that could shatter with too much pressure. "Mom," Chisholm whispered, voice breaking. "How long have you been dealing with this? Alone?" Adaze shook her head. "Just today." Utz shut his eyes, exhaling sharply. Then he looked directly at Peter. "Say it. What do you have to say for yourself?" Peter stood, arms hanging helplessly. He looked older, shrunk, almost as if the last few hours had drained the decades out of him. The man who once commanded respect now looked like someone caught stealing in the market. I got weak. Tola was comforting me. She said things that I haven't heard from anyone in this house in a long time." The excuse only thickened the air. Keen let out a short, bitter laugh. "So what, you needed extra sweet words from the neighbor? We, Mom, this house? That wasn't enough." Peter snapped. "Watch your tone. I'm still your father." Utz met his eyes, voice low but unshakable. "No one is denying you're our father. But being a father doesn't give you the right to turn our mother into a joke." The respect that once armored Peter's authority fractured. He still wore the title, father, but it felt hollow. Keen stepped forward, positioning himself like the spokesperson for all three. "You don't deserve to stay in this house anymore." The words slammed into the room like a metal door shutting. Peter's eyes widened. "What did you just say? This is my house." I sweated. Utz cut him off, calm but cold. "A house is where respect lives. You turned it into a place of betrayal. The moment you brought that woman here, you kicked yourself out, not us." Adaze lifted her head. She had never taught Utz to speak with such steel, but she understood. He was speaking not as a son, but as a man who had just watched his mother be humiliated. Peter turned to Adaze, desperate. "You're not going to say anything. You're just going to let them decide my fate?" Adaze looked at him for a long time. Gone was the admiration of her younger self. Gone the gratitude of the woman who once bailed him out of debt with her own savings. What remained was the cool clarity of someone who had walked through fire and would never step back into it. She parted her lips to speak, but before she could, Chisholm tightened her grip on her mother's hand. Chisholm faced Peter, voice steady. "Do you remember who stood by you in 1995? When your friends disappeared? When the bank was ready to take the house? When you couldn't look anyone in the eye?" Peter said nothing. Chisholm continued. "Do you remember who kept cooking? Who kept paying school fees? Who told us, 'Your father is just tired, don't be angry with him'?" Utz and Keen lowered their heads. Every path of memory pointed to one person. Chisholm turned back to her mother's worn face. She rested her forehead on Adaze's shoulder, voice cracking but firm. "Mom has sacrificed her entire life. Now it's time for her to be free." Peter slammed his hand on the table. The crack of his palm hitting the wood rang out sharply, making the water in the glass on the table tremble. "You are my children. None of you has the right to kick me out of my own house." His voice broke, a mixture of anger, fear, and a stubborn scrap of pride clinging on. Utz tightened his grip on the chair. Keen stood frozen. Chisholm flinched and held her mother's shoulders even tighter. No one spoke, but in the eyes of all three children there was the same realization. They were staring at the rawest version of the man they called father, a man used to giving orders, used to being respected, used to slamming his hand on the table and having everyone fall silent. But today, that slam didn't make the room bow. It just echoed and dropped into empty space. Adaze sat still, her hands clasped together on her knees. Not even that outburst made her flinch. After what had happened that afternoon, physical noise no longer had the power to shake her. Only words did. And that phrase, "my house," had hit the one place in her heart she had been silently guarding for decades. Peter went on, as if speaking faster could somehow bury the truth. "You all gotta go to school, get jobs, have a roof over your heads. Because of who? Because of me, that's who. I sweated blood and tears for this house. Don't stand there and act like I'm some criminal on trial." Utch drew a deep breath, ready to answer, but Adaze lifted her hand slightly to stop him. She rarely silenced her children, but this time she needed their quiet for what she was about to do to be heard clearly. She slowly rose to her feet. Every movement was measured, unhurried, as if she had rewound and replayed this exact moment in her mind many times before it finally happened. She reached for the cloth bag beside her chair. It wasn't the fancy handbag of a wealthy woman, but the same simple bag she used for the market, for women's meetings, for the bank. From it, she pulled out a stack of reddish-brown booklets, the covers faded, the pages inside slightly yellowed with age. The air in the room shifted. Utch frowned. Keen stared at the stack as if hypnotized. Even Peter fell silent, his eyes fixed on his wife's hands. Adaze set the documents down on the table, right in the middle of the room, between all the people whose lives were tied to them. The soft thump wasn't loud, but it was heavy. Everything went quiet. No one dared to breathe too hard. Even the ticking wall clock seemed to slow down. Adaze didn't sit back down. She stood by the table, one hand resting on the edge of the top booklet, the other lightly holding the hem of her blouse. She looked at each of her children, then finally let her eyes settle on Peter. "You said, 'This is your house.'" Her voice wasn't raised, but every word landed like a hammer. Peter lifted his chin, forcing a defiant look. "That's right." Adaze cut him off without raising her voice. "Then let's see whose house this really is." She opened the first booklet. On the cover, under the official heading, Certificate of Ownership of House and Land, and below, the line for owner, Ada E.Z. Iobiora. Not husband and wife, not Mr. and Mrs., just a single name, hers. Peter frowned, stepped closer, and bent over the page as if his eyes were lying to him. Utch swallowed hard. He had never paid attention to whose name was on the title. To him, it was just my parents' house. That was enough. He never imagined the truth was this specific. Adaze opened the second booklet. Another land certificate, the plot on the outskirts where they used to plant fruit trees when the kids were young. The children remembered it as the family land, a place that smelled of dirt and sun and childhood. On the paper, there was still only one name, Ada E.Z. Iobiora. The third booklet was a savings book. The fourth was a document for a small share in a local company. Each cover opened. Each page turned. And they all repeated the same fact. Every asset, house, land, savings was in one person's name, a Daeze. The air thickened like a silent storm forming. Keen understood more than anyone what those papers meant. He worked in finance, had advised many families about property and inheritance. But he never imagined that one day he would stand in his own living room and watch his mother step into the center of a story he'd only ever seen in other people as files. Peter was stunned. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The familiar confidence drained from his face, leaving behind only scattered wrinkles, and the bewildered eyes of a man who just discovered the ground beneath him was not concrete but sand. Adaze. What? What have you done? The question carried layers. He was asking why everything was in her name, why he didn't know, why my house suddenly no longer belonged to him, but Adaze heard it differently. To her, it sounded like, "How dare you protect this family without asking my permission?" And that stirred up a deep, bone-deep exhaustion inside her. She looked at him, and there was no trace left of the young woman who once admired her husband. These were the eyes of a woman who had carried the weight of an entire house on her back for years, and had just decided she would no longer carry it alone. She drew in a short breath, just enough to steady her voice. "Do you remember 1995, Peter?" Peter opened his mouth, then closed it. He remembered, whether he wanted to or not, that year. The debt swallowed us. Your friends disappeared. The creditors stood at the gate. You told me, if they take the house, I won't have the courage to look the children in the eye. The memory dropped into the room like a reversed reel of film. Adaze gently touched one of the documents, as if brushing an old wound. "I took everything I had. The gold my mother left me, the money I saved from every dress I sewed, every moi I sold. And I went to the bank. I signed the papers. I took on your debt with you." She lifted her eyes and looked straight at him, and the bank manager asked me, "Do you want to make sure the house and land cannot be seized if things go bad again?" Utch, Keen, and Chisholm held their breath. "I chose to protect this home. They said the best way was to put everything in one person's name. That person was me." Peter shook his head over and over. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you do this without asking me first? I'm the man of this house." The word man came out bitter. Adaze smiled faintly. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the tired smile of someone who realized the joke had gone on too long. "That night, you sat alone in the dark, clutching those debt papers, saying you didn't want to live anymore if you lost everything. I thought, if I told you I put the house and land in my name to protect us, what would you feel? Would you feel saved? Or would you feel small?" Peter couldn't answer. Because deep down, he knew his pride back then wouldn't have accepted being rescued by his wife. Adaze went on, her tone unchanged. "So I chose silence. I signed. I saved this house. And I let you keep walking tall in front of the children." She turned to her 3 kids, her gaze softening. "I didn't tell you. Because I didn't want you to see your father as a man who needed his wife to rescue him. I wanted you to be proud of him." Another kind of silence filled the room. Not the suffocating silence from the cheating video earlier. This was the silence of a different truth. The truth about a mother they'd always thought was in the background, when in reality she had been the pillar all along. Peter exhaled, voice cracking. "So, all these years, you let me live in the illusion that everything here was mine?" Adaze shook her head, slowly but firmly. "No, Peter. I didn't let you live in an illusion. I let you live in peace." She gathered the stack of documents into a neat pile, as if she were finally collecting the scattered pieces of a long-buried story. Then she placed her hand on top of them, sealing it. Her voice was calm, but solid as stone. "I'm only keeping what I built with my own 2 hands. As for you, you left this family the moment you betrayed me." The children signed the divorce support papers, one after another. No tears, no arguments. Only firm, decisive strokes of a pen, each signature, slicing the final thread between them and the man who had once Bentley's pillar. Utch signed first. He looked up at his mother with an expression more grown than he ever thought he could wear. "From now on, you don't face anything alone, Mom." Keen signed second. His slight nod said everything he wanted to say, but couldn't bring himself to speak in front of his father. Chisholm signed last, the youngest. The daughter who once believed her father was the family's hero. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand and whispered, "Mom, you deserve peace." Peter stood in the corner of the room, clothes wrinkled, face aged as if time had slapped him repeatedly in just one afternoon. He couldn't speak. No one looked at him. And for the first time in his life, Peter understood what it meant to be cut off from his family by his own actions. The afternoon passed slowly, no one noticing how the sunlight outside had changed color. The warmth in the house had been replaced by a cold, indescribable emptiness. There were no more words left to say, only truth hanging in the air. Finally, Hutch spoke. "Dad, you should pack your things." Peter jerked his head up, as if someone had yanked him out of a dream. Wait a minute. You're asking me to leave tonight? I don't have anywhere else to. Chisholm cut him off, her voice thin as a string but sharp as a blade. You should have thought about that before bringing another woman into this house. Peter turned to Adaze, eyes reddening, pleading. Adaze, you really want this? After 40 years? You want me gone tonight? Adaze didn't respond immediately. She stood, smoothed her light brown shawl, and spoke with a calmness so steady it made the room shiver. Peter, you left this family long before I said a single word. Unjust. Letting things unfold exactly the way you chose. Peter staggered slightly, like a man hit by an invisible gust of wind. He wanted to argue, but the words he'd spoken, the actions he'd taken, they stood around him like blades. Hutch opened the closet, pulled out the old blue suitcase Peter used for business trips, and placed it on the floor in front of him. Pack your things. It wasn't the tone of a rebellious son. It was the voice of one man speaking to another one who had lost the right to call this place home. Peter's hands trembled as he opened the drawers. Every shirt he stuffed into the suitcase felt like shoving years of mistakes into a box he could no longer close. No one helped him, no one spoke. The sound of the zipper closing echoed like the final note of a tragic symphony. When Peter stepped toward the door, dragging the suitcase across the tiles, Hutch and Keen stood on either side, not yelling, not blocking, not insulting. Their silence was the heaviest punishment of all. And Adaze, she stood behind them, not stepping forward, not reaching out, not blessing him nor cursing him. She stood like the last marker of the life he had destroyed. Outside the gate, dusk had fallen. Streetlights cast a faint yellow glow across the yard, and someone was waiting. Madame Tola. She wore a tight red dress, old high heels polished until they gleamed. Her curls were freshly washed, her lips painted boldly, as if she were greeting a lover stepping into a new life. She laughed when she saw Peter. "Oh, baby. Finally you." But her sentence died halfway, because the man standing in front of her was nothing like the man she flirted with that afternoon. This wasn't a proud man, not a man with money, not a man who could offer gifts and secret romance. This was a man broken, a man abandoned by his family, a man who had lost everything. Peter dragged the suitcase to the gate. The streetlight caught his face empty, pale, hands shaking as if he barely had strength to hold the handle. Tola stepped back half a step, not because she was surprised, but because she was afraid. Afraid of taking in a man with nothing. Afraid of being someone's lifeline. Afraid of sharing another person's shame. Tola had wanted secret excitement, not a lifelong burden. Peter opened his mouth. Tola shook her head, lips trembling, her voice no longer soft and seductive. I didn't think it would end up like this. Peter had nothing left to say. He understood. He had not only lost his family, he had lost the illusion of the woman he foolishly believed would be his new beginning. Behind him, Chisholm stepped forward, her voice ringing like metal against stone. You betrayed our mother. But worse, you betrayed your family. Peter turned around. His 3 children stood there, not as kids waiting for their father to come home for dinner, but as adults standing firmly on the side of the one person who truly deserved loyalty, their mother. Adaze did not move closer, but her shadow stretched across the yard, longer and stronger than anyone else's, proof that even in pain, she stood unbroken. Peter pulled his suitcase beyond the gate. No one accompanied him, no one called after him. No one held him back. Only the sound of the suitcase wheels rolling across cement followed him, fading. The iron gate slowly swung shut. A small clack echoed like the final period at the end of a long, painful story. The door closed slowly. The first morning after Peter left the house, sunlight fell gently across the kitchen window, like a greeting Adaze hadn't fully felt in years. No grumbling voice behind her. No heavy footsteps in the hallway. No constant guessing about whether her husband would be cheerful or irritable that day. There was only peace. A kind of peace the 60-year-old woman had once believed she would never feel again. Adaze made herself a cup of tea. Her hands trembled slightly with age, yet her movements were steady and sure. Steam rose from the cup, forming a thin veil before her face, then slowly dissolving. She watched it drift away, her heart light as the morning sun. For the first time in many years, she wasn't playing the role of the enduring wife, the keeper of harmony, the one patching up cracks in the family with silent smiles. Now she was allowed to simply be herself. After a simple breakfast, she walked into the bedroom and opened the wardrobe. From inside, she took out a small handheld mirror that once belonged to her mother. The wood frame was chipped, the surface a little worn, but the reflection was so clear that she startled at the sight of herself. The wrinkles around her eyes, the new strands of silver hair, but also eyes brighter, stronger, lit by a spark she thought she had lost long ago. She whispered softly, as if speaking to an old friend who had been waiting for her. Many women think they're too old to start over. But no one is too old to be treated with respect. The words fell into the room like a declaration, a quiet vow, but powerful. That afternoon, Utch stopped by. He stood at the doorway, watching his mother water the flowers in the garden. The golden sunlight touched her face, and for the first time in months, he saw his mother beautiful. Not the beauty of jewelry or fine clothes, but the beauty of a woman who had finally found herself again. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked. Adaze smiled a real smile, not the kind she used to wear to hide her sadness. "I'm okay, for the first time in 40 years. I'm truly okay." Keen arrived next, carrying a bag of fruit and little things she liked, sewing fabric, a new cookbook. He didn't say much, just set everything on the table and hugged her tightly. Chisholm came last. She sat beside her mother on the doorstep, leaning her head on Adaze's shoulder like she did as a child. "Mom, I'm so proud of you." Adaze rested her hand on her daughter's head and stroked her hair gently. "I didn't do anything grand. I just couldn't let someone trample over the years I sacrificed." Chisholm gave a sad, small smile. "Many women never dare to do that, Mom. I'm glad you did." The evening breeze moved through the garden, making the bougainvillea vines flutter softly. Adaze watched them sway and said slowly, "The trail doesn't care about age, but a woman has the right to defend her dignity. At any point in her life." Utch added gently, "And your family will always stand behind the one who lives with honor." Adaze looked at her 3 grown children gathered around her. A small moment, yet warm enough to make her feel as if the whole world was holding her close. Outside the gate, the sun began to set. Orange light spread across the rooftops, painting the sky like a path glowing ahead of her. A future without betrayal's shadow. A future without sighing alone in a dark kitchen. A future where she could live for herself, not for a marriage that existed only on paper. Adaze took a deep breath, the scent of bougainvillea drifting through the air. Then she stood up. No trembling, no fear, no regret. A new chapter of her life had begun. And the old one full of tears, pain, and betrayal had finally truly closed.